Excellencies, distinguished delegations, dear colleagues. Today's discussion lies at the heart of the idea of the responsibility to protect that emerged to precisely bridge the gap between early warning and effective action. As we mark the 20th anniversary of R2P this year, we stand on the cusp of a shifting world order marked by relentless attacks against international norms and institutions created to safeguard humanity. Now more than ever is the time to take stock and renew our commitment to principled diplomacy and multilateralism. It is in this context that I would like to share a few reflections. Thanks to the work of civil society organizations like mine, we have a more sophisticated understanding of the dynamics of how atrocity crimes, including war crimes and crimes against humanity, are committed in the context as different as Afghanistan, the Sahel, Venezuela, or the West Bank, and the factors that can mitigate their commission. In the case of crime of genocide, our understanding has evolved beyond the frameworks used to study the Holocaust to better understand how 21st century genocides against the Rohingyas, the Yazidis, the Uyghurs, or against the Palestinians in Gaza have been orchestrated and committed. In many of these cases, while perpetrators often pursue policies of mass killing and ethnic cleansing, genocides have been perpetrated through the erasure of a group's identity and their cultural destruction. Recognizing these evolving methods is essential for effective prevention and response. We also have a much better understanding of the diversity of tools available at the multilateral, regional, and national levels to respond to emerging or protracted crises. The international community has increasingly leveraged accountability mechanisms, including sophisticated ways to monitor and preserve evidence. Peacekeepers have often stood as shields between perpetrators and victims, and we have developed more effective strategies to protect the most vulnerable, including women and children. Yet all too often, responses to atrocity risks remain selective and shaped by political interests. Broad-based cross-regional solidarity with Ukraine demonstrated that when there is sufficient will, governments are able to mobilize rapid response and uphold their responsibility to protect. However, this stands in sharp contrast to the failure of many to prevent, acknowledge, or even condemn the genocide in Gaza and the apartheid policies in place against the Palestinians. Meanwhile, many cross-regional governments, while rightly criticizing Western bias, remain silent on the mounting evidence of atrocity crimes against the Rohingya, the Uyghurs, or the non-Arab communities in Darfur. Selective application of international law erodes the credibility of the multilateral system created to preserve it. Consistent application of double standards dilutes protection regimes and makes everyone unsafe. The divide between Geneva and New York also remains a barrier to the cohesive action. As mentioned today and often seen, early warning information produced by Geneva-based mechanisms are not consistently funneled into decision-making processes in New York, including in the discussions at the UN Security Council. Bridging the gap is essential to ensuring more holistic and effective response to atrocity risks. Allow me to also share a few words on the critical role of civil society organizations, human rights defenders, and affected communities. These actors are often the first to detect and respond to early warning signs, document atrocities, and diffuse tensions, even amid escalating violence. When violence erupts, they lead unarmed protection strategies that save lives and in the aftermath drive advocacy for justice, accountability, and reconciliation. Despite their expertise and frontline experience, human rights defenders and affected communities are often excluded from formal decision-making processes. In addition to practical barriers that prevent CSOs from engaging directly with decision makers, affected communities are frequently directed between various UN offices without receiving clear guidance or advocate support regarding the functioning of the system. How can they effectively engage with it, and what outcomes they can reasonably expect? One example of this is the pending follow-up on the third referral to the OSAPG on the situation in the Uyghur region. Excellencies, reinvigorating our collective responsibility to protect populations from atrocity crimes requires principled positions on crisis situations, bridging institutional divides, and embedding the perspective of affected communities at the heart of decision-making. Over the years, the HRC has taken important steps to respond to emerging crises, often through the rapid establishment of investigative mechanisms and fact-finding missions, such as most recently in the context of the DRC. However, too often, this initial action is treated as the end of the process rather than the beginning of a sustained international engagement on a crisis. Once these mechanisms deliver their findings, meaningful political follow-up is frequently lacking. The decision to terminate the investigations into Ethiopia at the very moment its experts reported that atrocity risks remain imminent is a stark example of this failure. Let us learn from it. As we gather here, Darfur is on the brink yet again. While the establishment of the fact-finding mission was an important first step towards accountability and preventing recurrence, more must be done to translate the findings and analysis into meaningful and timely political action. Friends, R2P is not just a principle, it's a promise to the world's most vulnerable populations. Let us honor that promise not with words, but with action. The credibility of the very system that made us gather here today and the lives of countless people depends on it. Protecting populations from atrocity crimes requires courage, not convenience. Thank you very much.